It's really lovely to be here to talk about Rory's work, or at least talk at him about his work, which is in no way upsetting for anyone. But yeah, I'll keep my bit very brief so we can get onto the good stuff and the poems and everything. I'll just quickly say a couple of words about Rory's new book, which some of you may have seen already, but probably most of you won't have, because I think it's obviously been launched tonight. It's called Come Here to This Gate. It's his fourth book, and those of you who probably know his other work will see that it's I think even a step on again from those books. It's in three discrete sections, but the poems have still got plenty in common. So even though there's kind of divisions, there's lots in common as well across the book. And I think there's lots of things we can talk about, and we'll probably talk about later on. But I think it's partly a book that does a lot with borders, borders between the past and present, but also physical sort of generational borders, and but it's still trying to connect across these borders. There's also lots to do in here with inheritance, I think, or I've certainly felt that way about some of these. Not just the idea of sort of parental inheritance or family inheritance, but what we inherit in culture and form and folk music, folk tradition. There's versions of folk poems in here, which I think Rory's going to read one from later on. In the words of the book itself, there's an aware and wary tone to some of these poems, which you'll hear as well. And as with so much of Rory's work, it's global. It's sort of looks across the whole world. We go to Korea, and there are communists in Paris, and all sorts of things in between. And it looks deeply into the memory, and it does so with a depth of feeling and a formal control, which those of you who know Rory's work will know is always beautifully handled and never sacrifices feeling in its kind of architecture, but thinks about both very deeply. So anyway, I'll stop wittering on at this point, and I'll hand the mic, the virtual mic, over to Rory so he can start reading some poems for you, which is why we're all here. Brilliant. Thanks. Yeah, nice one. Good luck to you, Rory, and may God go with you.
May God go with me. Thank you, Deck. I trust everyone can see me. I'm just sharing my screen. So thank you. Sorry, I had a little sneezing fit a minute ago, so bear with me if I sniffle a bit. Thank you, Deck. Thanks very much, and Jasmine. Student cuts. Ah, this must be the place, I thought, skidding up on my mountain bike at AJ Moody Ropodist above the door of a side street semi. It didn't look much like I'd thought it would, but anyway, the woman on the phone seemed nice, reassuring. I dismounted, ambled up the weedy drive, knocked twice, then stepped away, and smiled at Mrs. Moody's smile, which coaxed me through. You're somewhat late, I'll fit you in. I nodded, sat at her command. My boot came off. Yep, I'll handle that, she said, like a mechanic, as my big toe pulsed its red bulge raw in feeling air. You might want this. She handed me a rough pink towel. What's it for? To bite, love. Metal clinked. A drawer was opened, shut. I leapt up like a startled hare and lolloped out. Relieved of 2 crisp 20s, sure, but... Oh, and of my bike. So the book begins with a sequence about the last year and a bit of my father's life. He died in January 2022. I'm going to read some poems from that sequence. The sequence is called All But Forgotten. 1. The shortest day, Intwood Ward. She walks me briskly past a row of bays, alcoves in which a body lies contorted in each peaceable corner. Out here is chaos. We stop at Bay 5. You'll know which one he is. Then she gestures, smiles, pads off somewhere else. And do I? Then I do. Hi, Dad, I say. So he judders, heaves his chin up from his chest, beams. Hello, son. His face is not quite his. They've still not bloody told me why I'm here. They have. I find a chair, pull up to him, and we settle. His nappy fills beneath the blanket as he talks about school, the miracle of my birth, the flowers on the wasteland of his life, bursting into a meadow of his making, which we both lie in together finally. And this is dignity. Opposite, Brian talks himself to sleep, snores, wakes and talks himself to sleep, snores, wakes and talks and sleeps. Is life a tight loop, easy enough to ignore? Unlike the doctor's call, now a fugue in my head. Sorry, but yes. Months. It's hard to say when he'll develop symptoms. I've looked them up, seen clots in clotted colons, morphine drips, taut mouths in final circles. What's the date? The 21st, Dad. Just another day here. Then he chuckles, tells me something else I recall differently. Dad? Yes. I'm proud of you. He grins. It fades. Does he know that can't be true? There's a counter, I don't know what I'd call it really, two narratives weaved together through the sequence, one in italics, a smaller one in italics, evenly distributed throughout. So I'm going to read one of those. Interlude, First Night, Lincoln, 1983. The kids on the street are glad to see the Wayne, but his mammy can't stop today, and she's sorry. She wheels him out of Lower Captain Street, across the Ban, to a bus across Coleraine and all of Antrim. Then high across the sea they go, then across the waste of England to Nanny's house, the first place he'll remember. You'll smash her teeth for that. You don't know 3 has now become just you, that they're not out for the day, that when you return from Anchor Bar, her side of the bed will be colder even than usual, his cot an empty cage. They've not gone far, you'll reason, when you lurch in, slap the light to find the old familiar absence there, then check the wardrobe, still full of her things, and sneer. And then the telephone will ring. 7, being present. Not every night, but most, when I call, and you haven't remembered what we've talked about, I go on loop to see the half hour out. So, did you listen to the footy? No. Surprise in your voice. No, somehow I forgot. What's been on the radio? What was dinner? You rarely know the answers, or the questions, or that you've known the things that keep you there. But lacking heart, or having one, or both, I keep to tiny talk, or tinier talk. The sound of breath, yours chafing against mine, until I'm tired now, son. Good night. Tomorrow, Dad, we'll do this again for the first time. It won't grow old. It won't have even begun. 8. Home. T-shirt weather today. A bumblebee bumps the window, and the door of the visiting room yawns and nudges a pot. We could go out, sniff freedom over the fence. You'd rather not. You've come to take me home? No, Dad. I've come to bring it to you, blind on your piss-proof seat on wheels, most of you a line of little knots beneath a blanket. Stop-gap clove to your ham. You'd get that and it wouldn't help. I ask someone to bring your sippy cup, some biscuits, and you chew them in the back of your open mouth in quiet, thinking, too afraid to talk. So I watch the ridge of your forehead, feel my own for impulse or connection, which doesn't come until a nurse does, panting, to the door, to tell us, darlings, we have 5 minutes more. Sorry, excuse me. 10. All I've done for want of wit to memory now, I can't recall. It's a line from a song, as some of you will know. You're tired again. There's nothing to talk about. Your no's and yeses are barbed to make that clear, but you're scared to be alone. I help us out. It's bedtime, I should go. Then I sing, good night and joy be with you all. The parting glass designed to pull you near, to make you Irish daddy and make me small. It doesn't take with you, so I hum it. We hum together through the night, by satellite, ear to mouth, mouth to ear. Then I ring off and someone tugs your light. 12. Private ceremony. Last week, you were a baby in the corner of a naked room you'd never recognised, and looked through the mattress, looked through me, saw nothing you would ever recognise. I fucked off when you said to. Okay, Dad, bye. The coroner's not come yet. I'll take you up. She smiles. We walk. He's here. You are not there, and yet you are completed. Every you were. Night then, Dad. All eyes pronounce at once. And I close my eyes, like yours. Turn. Leave us there. So that's the fun ones out of the way. So the second section of the book, the first poem I read, Student Cuts, is from that second section. First section is a sequence. The third contains the folk tales. The second, and there's a short sort of prologue and epilogue, one poem and then two poems at the end. And the central section is called Come Here to This Gate, and it contains a poem called Come Here to This Gate. And it's obviously right in the middle of the book, and I think everything kind of maybe folds into or out of it. Metaphorically, I guess it's not a origami piece, is it? But anyway. Return. The housefly hitting windows in your house, then gone and lost in a dying tree that drops a nut. The mouse that chews, then flees. The louse, it brushes against your books that night, sets free with crumbs of eggs. The day you'll comb your child's head, oh, and see her scalp their home of plenty. Your coupe back from a wash, plated chrome shining where you hit that grouse. The wall clock's metronome, the summer house you own for now. Your late returning distant spouse. Doubles at the tennis club. I'm sitting out this round, pretending to watch as the rest of the seconds team practices for a match at Ulverthorpe or Culverthorpe or somewhere. Their chic cars glint by a hedge where sparrows flood out, then in. Men stoop in studied formation. A serve slaps a tramline. A second makes a safe arc, then tuck goes the ball, and the fat lad across the net lags behind it, gives up as it splashes the fence. He's a dad and a lawyer or something. He must get paid 6 figures. He's set the wife up with a cake shop, or so he's said. Queen shimmers from the windows of his Audi each time he creeps up to the clubhouse, and hi John, someone will beam. Hi Dan, Jeff, Pat. Though he just nods at me, we haven't been introduced yet. But on court he's Grease and grunts, aware and wary. We're both at home there, and now he's calling for me. My friends, the communists. For those who don't know, Berat is in Albania. My friends, the communists. 1. Loughborough. Timmy pedals his trike about the lawn with all his tiny might, tips in a bed of roses. Mummy's up before the lad has registered the shock, and here it is, but there she is. Excited, Leon yawns and wags his tail thump thump, then rests his head back across his paws. But where is Dad? Ah, here he comes with beer, buns, sausages. He grinds the drum grill open, twists a knob, and flamelets pucker. You want one of these? He holds a can. I nod, then sits a while, then passes it. Congrats, mate, on the job. He means that. Deck chairs ripple in the breeze, then Mummy fills one, waves to Timmy, smiles. 2. Berat. Excuse me. 2. Berat. An old man sips pastis with Ismail Kadare in Paris, right? Some panels brasserie. Yes, all those things, says Myrrell. The other man, this, he prods, wobbles the frame and steadies it. He is my father. The picture was taken the day they met again in 1993, the first time in 12 years. My father missed my childhood. He said we'd too little to eat. Someone informed. And then he locks my gaze, which drags free, flits across his little shop of sloughed off heirlooms, old coins, chairs, a chest, uniforms, tobacco tins and trays from some lost workshop. And I pick it up, the Enver bust I'll buy my friends, in jest. I like to think of the last section of the book, the Lincolnshire folk tales, as some kind of pudding, but maybe in some senses a slightly rude pudding. It's like spotted dick, I guess. And this is one of those, the last of those. It's the last poem I'll read. It's a little bit longer. So Nanny wrote, it's a cautionary tale set in the south of Lincolnshire. Mathwood is perfectly real. Bourne is a little town that means something around here, but probably nothing wherever you are. There we are. Nanny wrote. Mathwood is a small plot of trees south of Bourne, next to McDonald's and Lidl. It's privately owned, full of shotgun shells, pheasants, but still a bit of an idyll. And Mike lived in Bourne and Doreen in Northorpe, a hamlet just south of the wood. And Mike had got married and Doreen had too, and because they were up to no good, they'd meet now and then by the well in the middle, kiss, fumble, roll on the loam for a bit, then rush back for vigorous showers before their spouses got home from work. Someone has to. Now, Mathwood's well named. It's a puzzle, a subset of signs, square roots, infinities, integers, means, 5s, 6s, 7s, 8s, 9s, weaving about on top of a congruence. All very pretty when light is streaking through leaves into leaves and leaf litter. It's rather less pretty at night. But as Doreen set out, the sun splashed each tree and blackberries brushed every track and squirrels and blackbirds were bobbing about, and she didn't think once to head back till she saw a strange woman reading a book, the tenant of Wildfell Hall, on a log by the scraggle of path. She was filthy, her face obscured by a shawl, and she didn't look up, just twisted her neck to the spot where Doreen now stood, deciding to turn or to pass. Then she rasped, I've seen you here, up to no good. That fat little goon gave the clap to his wife, and you think you're the one, but you're not. You'll ruin your life. She cackled. Take care. Was she mad? Her breath smelled like rot and a bottle of Buckfast was wedged in her lap. Yes. Doreen shot like a rabbit round the foul thing, then a bend, then another, then she tired, decided to sit and thumbed Mike a message. Ever met the old hag, X? What, X? Never mind, it's not good, X. Then her battery died as she went to hit send. Shit. So she sped through the wood for a few minutes more and came to the well, but Mike hadn't made it there yet. And half an hour later, he still hadn't come. It wasn't like Mike to forget. This was too new. But soon the wood changed, the sky going orange, then black, as bats replaced birds and the moon floated in. She gave up and resolved to head back. And was it her tears, the sting of rejection, the dark, or blind fear she'd get caught if Steve came home early? Whatever it was, her route was an infinite naught or something like that. Then she stopped for a rest by a little hut covered in ivy. What on earth was it? She'd not been this way. Then a shaky voice cried, "Come to me." And she saw the old hag slide out from the door, the tattered shawl down by her waist, her arms thrust in front as she ran straight at Doreen's synapses, pulling her face to a scowl of disdain. That's the last Doreen saw. And no, this tale has no redemption. For that, blame the people of Northorpe or Bourne. If you like it, give Rory a mention. That's it. You're allowed to come back now, Declan.
Hello, how's it going? Can you hear me?
You can be heard.
Okay,
Well,
good. That
I
was
can hear you.
okay. Well, I mean, you can always hear me. We've got that link, haven't we?
Yes,
Um,
that's true. Yes.
no, that was very good. As other people I think are saying in the chat as well. We'll only encourage you. But no, that was a really brilliant reading. And there's loads of things I could and might try and talk to you about, but I'll try and not overstay my welcome and make sure that we also get questions
I
from other
just say
people
that
as well.
the folk tales are really fun to read live,
Mm,
and they seem to, and you know, they're kind of written with that in mind, or with sort of being heard in mind. Yeah,
yeah,
so it's quite strange reading one on the screen, and yeah. So I hope it went okay. But yeah,
it did.
sorry, go for
No,
it.
it did. It went really well, I think, and it was nice that you got a little mention for yourself at the end as well, just in case.
Well, yeah, you've got to. I mean,
So.
it's an act of pure narcissism, isn't it? Too, but you know, sod it.
No, it didn't feel narcissistic. It was like a sort of Lincolnshire rap, wasn't it? But
Yeah. It's kind of it's
yeah.
yeah. If we have a rap battle though, we just cry a lot. Yeah.
Don't we all? But yeah, well, I mean, there's lots of things that we could start on, but I thought maybe the thing we could talk about first, hopefully we'll get to talk about a few things, is I was struck in the epigraphs to the book. You can always tell people more fully what they are, but there's lots to do in there with the past and with being sort of haunted to some extent. But I think in general, the poems throughout the book, they do a sort of a certain degree of time travel, I think. And so I was wondering if you want to talk a little bit about that, about kind of time and the past, particularly in these poems, maybe, you know, in any particular ones, but they've all got aspects of that, I think, across the whole book.
Yeah, I mean the book, the sequence anyway, the all but forgotten sequence, the sequence at the beginning of the book bears two epigraphs, right? Ken Kesey loved "You Can't Use It" in the past tense, and a wonderful. I can almost remember it word for word, but I just don't want to mess it up. So Hisham Mata, the past like a severed limb tried to fix itself onto the body of the present. And I think they sort of they work for that sequence, stand over it, and I very much, that sequence really felt like it clicked when I hit upon the idea of building in a different narrative, a second narrative, something that kind of goes through time much more quickly, but is shorter in itself, and that's signified by it's centered around three poems that are all in almost exactly the same form, or they look almost exact. They look basically the same, and there are some variations within that. And they're sort of waymarkers for the other poems, which wander about in a bit more. I wrote those poems at the time, pretty much, or I drafted them at the time, and obviously I was very much caught in that moment. I was my dad's only regular visitor, and it was during the pandemic as well, or some of it was, so during lockdowns and stuff. And there were other things that made it very difficult for me to go and see him as often as I could that were nothing to do with that. But yes, it felt too. I don't really know how to say this, but when I was focusing, because my life was so much caught up in those moments and that time, and not like his was, of course. It was 24 hours of misery every day, but being the only person he really regularly speak to and that sort of thing, and going to see him, and the sequence was obviously very much stuck in that present moment, and I needed to let some light in, and to provide a context to some of those poems, and to have. I'm not answering a question at all, am I?
Yeah,
I'm
you
just
are.
I'm just saying what comes into my head. These are just mind turds flying out. Um, uh, Give me the question again, Deck. Let's try again. Sorry, I'll
Well,
try
I think
try and be a bit more concise.
it's partly I was partly thinking about the past, the relationship it has. I mean, in some ways, the poems they have sort of time travel built into them, don't they? That sense that you're kind of moving around in that immediate moment that the poems are set, but there's also, you bring in so much of a shared past, but there's also a sense of, an ongoingness of it, and doing it over again. I think one of the poems says something about, we'll do it again for the first time, and
Yeah,
there's that kind of chance to replay things and revisit them, I think, to some extent throughout the sequence, and
yeah,
I
I
think,
guess
yeah,
that's true.
yeah.
And what one is different. I didn't read this poem obviously, but there's a poem in the second section. Um, well, you know that phenomenon when you go on, so you've had some sort of upheaval in your life, and then bloody Facebook keeps reminding you of things
Yeah, yeah,
that so so there's a poem about that. There are those kind of ways of looking at the past. I suppose with the folk tales, what I wanted to do with the folk tales, um, I love folk tales. I think they're great, and or they can be, and they have so much potential in telling because they often have a kind of fairly thin narrative frame, and you can build all sorts of things on top of them and play with them in all sorts of different ways. But so often they're rewritten as though we live in this kind of bucolic past that we don't really live in.
yeah,
And I thought, well, sod that. Let's put them in sort of rollicking ballads, and bring in people I know. And I mean, he might kill me for saying this, but there's a joke in the poem I read because uh, and they're great. I mean, my oldest friend, or the friend I've known for the longest, he's my age. He's not 108 or anything, but Mike, really good friend of mine. Well, he's the one of the protagonists, so presumably got in that poem. I don't know how to say this. Doreen is the name of his mum, and Steve's the name of his brother. So it's a joke, and I don't think that matters, but he certainly liked it. And in Lincolnshire, that's fine, by the way. But I think that the folk tales are a great way of playing with traditions, some of which have been forgotten, or traditional stories that have basically been forgotten, um, and bringing them into the present and having lots of fun with them at the same time. So yeah, I think thinking about the past and the present and the kind of relationship between them, the hinge between them, the way the water just moves back and forth between them is kind of central to. So I guess it's central to how I think a lot, but I think it's probably central to how all of us think a lot in different ways, isn't it?
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
absolutely. I mean, I think that's exactly right. I mean, well, let's stay with the folk tales for a moment, and I think also something you touched on there, that idea of updating things or bringing them into the present. I mean, I think one thing that's striking about your work is that you often use sort of stanza and full rhyme, or at least a kind of half rhyme, and these things that we might think of as other sorts of inheritance maybe, but they always feel very much of the contemporary moment. It's not fancy dress. You're using them as a way of talking about the immediate present, but you're doing that with these things that are to some extent, in a tradition or in a line. I mean, I wonder if you wanted to talk a little. I mean, without going too far down the architectural subcommittee, but if you want to talk a little bit about the making of some of the poems, and how that came about and how you chose the particular way of approaching. I mean, obviously the folk poems maybe suggested the ballad form or something, but yeah, if you want to talk about that, the making of the poems a little.
Yeah, the folk tales suggested the ballad form. I've got little else to say about that apart from I won't get particularly technical or whatever, but I didn't One of them's in iambic. Is one of them's iambic, and the others aren't. They're yeah, they cram more syllables into line.
Mm.
It's the very simplest way to put it.
Yeah,
So
but
they sort of bob and race along.
mm,
The In terms of form, when people describe me, I mean, I say when people describe me like the whole world's out there describing me all the time, but whenever I'm described by someone as a formalist, a little bit of me dies. But I definitely, to some extent, I am. You know, they're tools in the toolkit, aren't they? So I'm
yeah,
going to use them when I think they're appropriate. And I don't understand why some people are so against that. Although, you know, the horses for courses, whatever. Um, but yeah.
yeah. No, I mean, obviously people do. You're not in the WhatsApp groups, are you? That we have.
No,
Where,
no.
where we describe you constantly.
Yeah,
No,
yeah, no, the Rory fan club. Yeah, yeah, it's
yeah,
massive. Yeah. I'm not allowed in though.
no, no, that's what
No.
it is, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think I'm sort of jumping around a little bit. It's just there's a few things I want to touch on, and then obviously I want to make sure there's time to open it out a little bit to other people. But another thing I did really want to sort of talk to you about, or mention, is one of the other things that seems to come across a lot in these poems, across all the different sections. I'm partly trying to make sure it's things that talk to all three sections, so you can range around a bit. But this idea of being sort of rooted and about leaving and staying, I think there's a lot to do with leaving and staying. I mean, expressly, sometimes you talk about that. There's one poem that talks about, I would have stayed, I think is the last line. But there is something about this. All your books, I think, have always crossed borders and been quite global in their approach. But this feels particularly like it has a lot to do with this idea of where you are and what home is, and how you move around, and what that means. So maybe you could talk a little bit about moving or leaving, staying, and that kind of that urge to move around a bit. Then.
Yeah, the line you quoted there is, and I probably would have stayed too.
Mm.
Christ, I probably would have stayed, and that's about the thought of staying in Lincolnshire, I guess, which I love. So figure that one out.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, sorry, it's really hard for me to think what I might say about that. I suppose I'm again, I think we probably all think about this a lot of the time, but the decisions that we make and the decisions we might have made, and the world we might have had if we'd made other decisions, and the world we might not have had if we'd made other decisions. And you could drive yourself mad, couldn't you, doing that? And I'm generally speaking very happy. But I suppose that's like that's a central way in which I think really indecision is at sort of the heart of who I am. I think. Yeah, so maybe that runs through the book to some extent. It can't really not. And I would say a lot of the poems are not, maybe more so than any of the others, are definitely not about me at all. Um, and though the first section, the sequence at the beginning, I suppose to some extent it is, so it's somewhat from my perspective, and it's essentially centered in very real things that happened. But I don't think those things make my situation particularly special. That they don't. The the hideousness of. I mean, my dad had essentially alcohol-induced dementia, and had lost almost all of his friendships and so on throughout his life, and was very much alone. But we all have something. We all will have something, or we all have had something that's in many cases much worse than that. So um, to deal with, or to be around, or to try to solve. Um, so yeah, I hope. I mean, my little flippant comment about narcissism. I hope that sequence isn't. I don't know how to say this, but it's not. It's about me, but I'm aware that I'm not special. It's not a poem looking for. It's not a sequence looking for any sympathy whatsoever.
No, I think that comes across really well. I mean, there's a kind of a clarity to it, and a kind of, again, I think one of the interesting things about it is there's an I in it, but it's also as much as it's a singular eye, there's kind of all these eyes. You know, I think that's in one of the poems you read, isn't it? All the eyes said, you know, I think it catches you, or you know, whoever you were and whoever you become across a whole range of time. And I think that's what makes it so interesting and so moving,
Yeah.
really.
Night then dad, all eyes pronounce at once.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was just there he was in front of me, you know.
Yeah. And I think the eye that's in that sequence, you know, is also kind of in conversation with so many of these other characters in, you know, in the second section particularly, that is full of narratives that aren't your own, you know, kind of very clearly have some of that narrative sort of storytelling aspect. And I think they're, you know, they're given no less sort of credence or decency, or however we might want to talk about these things. And I mean, one thing I'll touch on, and then I'll start opening it up to I can see there's questions in the Q&A. I'll make sure we get to those. But one final thing, I mean, it sort of sticks with a little bit with that opening sequence for a moment, but there's a poem in there about recording, about making recordings, and I wondered, sort of jumping off from that idea, I wondered how much you were kind of thinking about the idea of sort of accuracy and of poems as versions of recordings, or if that wasn't really a factor, and if you were much more concerned about, you know, the other things that matter about a poem, you know, making it a poem, making it sort of musical and resonant, or if the kind of recording angel aspect of you was a figure in particularly maybe those first poems, you know, the idea of accuracy, if we can
Okay.
call it that.
Yeah, the poem you're mentioning is it was originally called the Sound Album, but it's the last poem in the sequence, and it's a coda, and it brings the other narrative up to the present as well, so they connect to that point. I did. I made some recordings of my dad. He didn't know I was doing it. Just while we were on the phone, whenever he seemed in happier mood, which was quite rare. I just wanted the sound of his voice talking about, you know, nice normal stuff. And yeah, I had a difficult relationship with him, and he was a very difficult man, but I loved him very much and stood by him as well as I could. And I just wanted some some kind of sound, so some recording of him occasionally talking slightly animatedly, but recording the truth. I think poems largely, yeah, they can lie their way to the truth, and they can
Yeah.
wave their poetic license in your face, and they're not affidavits, right? But this poem had to be true, to me anyway. It had to be true. There's nothing in there that isn't, from my perspective at least, entirely true. And its quotations are often verbatim. But I don't think that, I think you can find other ways towards fidelity. I don't think a poem has to be of course not, it's ridiculous, you know. I'm not a first year undergraduate who needs to be told, no, you don't need to think like that. And most of the stuff in the rest of the poems is made up to some
Yeah.
extent, sometimes entirely, but you know, sometimes not entirely.
Yeah, no, I mean, absolutely, there is a real narrative streak, isn't there? I mean, not just in the folk tales, which obviously are so openly are sort of storytelling, you know, yarns. I think some of the others, you do feel like you've got some of that kind of novelistic quality. Anyway, I'll stop whittering on at this point because there's quite a few questions, so I want to make sure we
I love
start.
telling stories. I'll say that. The folk tales were such a joy to write. They were
Yeah,
the most fun I've ever had with a pen in my hand. And don't smile like that. Uh, yeah, they were a joy to write, and I do love narrative. But of course, I didn't make up the frame of those plots at all. I just toyed around with them. Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. All right, great. Well, let's start opening it up a bit. So there's already some questions in here, so I'll run through and I'll start passing them on to you, and you can spray your wisdom around like so much buckshot. Yeah, the first one is from Barry Tench, and he said, "You've said of this book, it isn't a book about you, it has more of you in it than the others." And he's just asking, in what way, I suppose, is that the case?
Yeah, good question. In what ways does it have more of me in it than the first, the opening that we talked a lot, maybe too much about
Yeah,
that, but
yeah,
the opening sequence is I've never been more nervous about publishing anything. It feels a bit naked, so I guess that's how I mean. And it's also quite, I think it's more wide ranging, despite having these three discrete sections, which I think work well together as well, and then the poems outside of it. I do think it's a pretty wide-ranging collection and contains a lot of the aspects of my personality one way or another, or reflects them or something like that. So I think that's what I mean, really. Those two things.
Okay, great. Another one, Isabel Thompson has said we've sort of touched on it a little bit about the sort of unity across the different sections, but she's asked particularly what role do you think time and place or setting might play? Which sounds very interesting. I'm quite keen. I mean, you're quite keen on the old landscape, aren't you? You like a Balkan mountain as much as the next man.
I'll have a Balkan mountain in me. Time and place. What kicks me off into writing? What kicks me off into writing? That's a terrible phrase. The thing that I don't know. I suppose now this is my fourth book of poems. Every time I finished one, I've not written anything for a little while, and then some things I've not written any poems for a little while, and then some things kicked me off again. And this time it was I was a writer in residence in Busan, South Korea, and I was there to write about the border. Obviously, as someone who's very much an outsider, I do actually have a friend who lives about 5-6 miles from where I was put, which is a lovely thing, and we met up a lot. But that got me started again, really. So I suppose places often. I mean, going somewhere makes me want to write, but not necessarily about where I am. And a lot of the poems I wrote when I was about where I was. Some of them were, and a few of them are in the book. The best of them, I hope, made it into the book. My own place. So I would say going to places is very important to me, and I tend to write when I'm somewhere, for sure, or tend to often turn to poetry, but often not about where I am. Place for me, I suppose it's very important to me to think about, to know and love where I'm from, and I think I probably would wherever that was, and I think of myself as really being from Lincolnshire. My mum took me there when I was 2, and that's where I remember growing up. And I was born in Belfast and lived for 2 years in Northern Ireland, but I don't remember any of that. So that's very important to me. So the Lincolnshire folktales, yes, I suppose on some level I wanted to champion an unfashionable county. I suppose place is really important to me, and again to lots of other people, right? But yes, it is. Yeah.
Great. Another one, Alison Brackenbury has said that one of your titles refers to Walter Delamere, and she was wondering if there are any poets in particular whose techniques might have influenced you.
There are loads of poets I love. I could just reel off tons of names. It's a good question,
but I guess particularly formally, maybe she's thinking there.
Yeah, I think the poet I return to most probably is so sound like a teenager talking about their favorite band or something, but probably the poet I return to most is R.S. Thomas, which might surprise some people, but it's probably true. But I don't think there's much of me really in his work apart from his. I admire him for a lot of things, or admire his work anyway for a lot of things. But the hard pared back honesty of his work really matters to me. But I don't think we're much alike. The obvious point of comparison for the opening sequence is probably going to be for a lot of people Tony Harrison's from the School of Eloquence, and I love that sequence. And there are poems in there that no matter how if I just know them off by heart, and if I think about them, I could almost cry. They're so brilliant. Some of them. But I don't think the sequence is much like him, and I don't think I'm much like him as a poet, really. I don't know how else to answer that apart from just keeping reeling off names of poets.
No, fair enough.
Delamere, I mean, he's obviously quite unfashionable. It's fine by me. So am I. Look at me, for God's sake, Yeah, no, sorry, I haven't got anything else to say about that. I could just name other poets I like and talk about how I don't think I'm like them defensively, but I mean, I don't really know what else to do.
A
Sorry.
dispassionate list of
It's a
poets.
good
Yeah.
question. I'm just crap at answering it. Sorry,
No,
Alison.
it's all right. Just a dispassionate list of all the poets who've ever written. Um, I did, yeah, I mean, the R.S. Thomas. I knew you sort of had an R.S. Thomas link. Was he on your PhD? Did you write part of
Yeah,
your PhD
yeah,
on
he
him?
was the
Yeah,
first poet I definitely wanted to write about for
yeah,
my PhD. Yeah, he was.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm just now assuming that in your room you've got a box full of beaks. But Rob, yeah,
I've
Rob
also
Percy.
got a. Have you seen that? We must have seen that picture of him leaning out of the door, leaning out
Yeah,
of this
yeah,
kind of
yeah,
stable door, looking like
yeah.
someone who would kill you if only they were strong enough. Yeah,
Is that the next cover of the book?
yeah, yeah. It's me like that. I don't have enough hair actually. My
Well,
partner, my partner Francesca says I look like an owl. I hope everyone feels they're getting their £2 worth. Anyway, sorry, carry on. Go for
they,
it.
they can probably tip at the end afterwards. Yeah, Rob Percy's asked about the folk tales. He said that he enjoyed he said he loved, in fact, the folk tales
Thank you.
when you read in Kent last year. Do you remember that? You had
Yeah,
a nice time.
of course.
That
Yeah, I
wasn't
did. Yeah.
that's not the question. And then he said, yeah, are any of them specific to Lincolnshire, or are there kind of versions of these stories that you can be found across the country and across different counties, or are these sort of Lincoln's own?
Here we go. Right, brilliant. So yes, well, there are four. So one of them's the Lincoln Imp, which is very well known, and it's Lincoln Imp's this little grotesque above the altar, more or less, in Lincoln Cathedral. It's very famous. Obviously, I say obviously, as though everyone know, but it's the mascot of Lincoln City Football Club, and it's used by the council. And there used to be these usher imps, these bits of jewelry, expensive jewelry, and it was patented and all of that. And it's very probably the most famous bit of stonework in the whole of Lincolnshire, and maybe one of the most famous gargoyles in the country. I think it is. And the tale associated with that is with the imp is quite well known, but it includes a wind that flies around. It's a devilish wind flying around outside the cathedral, and that's quite common. So you often find this with folk tales. There are analogues all over the place, and it's just a variation on a local theme. One of the others in the book, Yallery Brown, which one of my favourite Lincolnshire folk tales, and I would say it is a Lincolnshire folk tale. It was collected in the 1880s by a woman called Marie Clothild Balfour. She was there for 2 years, and she collected folk tales, or alleged to have done so, from local people, sometimes in pubs. It's hard to believe that, but anyway, she collected them. Yallery Brown's about this kind of small boggart made of sort of mud and excrescences, and he's a malevolent little git. And all of the tales she collected 10, and there were, well, no more, but 10 of them were collected in the journal Folklore in 1891 in 3 installments, and they don't really have any analogues. They do distantly, but nothing directly, and that's very unusual, which has led some people to think she made them up. And she was a young budding novelist, so it's possible. And who cares? Yeah,
Exactly.
so it does depend. So, some have analogues. The cautionary tale about going into a wood and all that. That's obviously about 12 to 13 billion analogues all over the place. So yeah, they're often that you find that with folk tales, that there are specifics, but they tap into something much more common and widespread.
Yeah,
I mean, there are
absolutely.
loads of examples, like the devil lifting, or a giant lifting earth on a spade and going to chuck it in a river to drown a town or something, and then he gets bored, or is you know uh, somehow accosted or stopped or tricked, and chucks the earth down in a huff and then storms off again, and that's why there's a hill there like that, and that sort of thing repeats all over the place. So a lot of folk narratives, yeah, they just recur all over the place, and they're fixed to specifics in that location. But some of mine are, and some of them aren't.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
And staying in the region, Helen Tookie said, from one East Midlander to another, do you think there's
Hello.
such a thing as a Midlands way of thinking, seeing, or speaking, which might come through in your poems?
Yeah, Helen, it's just better than everyone else's, isn't it? I don't know. No, probably not really. No, I don't know. No, no, not particularly. Not particularly. I think people in Lincolnshire are often pretty down to earth and friendly as well. I think that's quite a common trait. And I lived in Leicester, and I know that Helen's from Leicestershire, and I think that's probably true there too. Um, but all of these things fall apart at the level of anything at any specific level, don't they? You can go to the happiest town in the world and find the saddest person in the world in it, can't you? Sort of thing. So, um, um, yeah, I don't think there is really, apart from probably a bit less showy than in some places on average, and a bit more likely to say hello.
I mean, we all know that the internet radicalizes people, so we should probably get off this East Midlands
Oh yeah,
jumping
we're all
because
the same now. We all think we're American, don't we? All think we're
exactly,
American teenagers or whatever. But anyway,
exactly.
yeah.
We probably I've got time for at least one more, so I'll just see if I can come up with one. There's a few here that we haven't got to yet, so I'll just sort of semi pick one at random. Um, let me see, where are we? Okay. Yeah. So Royston Tester, he says that it was a very moving and powerful reading, which I certainly agree with, and in the end funny.
Thank you.
But yeah, he said, if he may ask, with the sort of private personal experiences that you've written about, how long did it take in some cases before you were able to write about them? Or you said that obviously some of it was happening at the time, but I mean, were there things that took you longer to digest and write about, or did you find it was happening sort of in the contemporary time?
Yeah. First of all, thank you um, very much for that. Um, those poems in that sequence, I wrote most of them, or at least wrote the what would become most of them at the time. I didn't know it'd be a sequence. I was just writing, and a lot of things, and that I wrote are obviously not in there as well. Um, I was shaping something too, but I didn't know I was shaping something at first. I was that sounds a bit pathetic. I was sort of coping with the situation, and it was my way of thinking through that. But if a poem's only good for your journal, leave it there. So uh, yeah, largely they were written, at least initially written at the time. In some cases, not, and the narrative that weaves through them that was somewhat disjointed from that time. The poem, the private ceremony poem 12, which there are actually 17 poems in the sequence, but that's the numbered ones, so the main narrative, I suppose, narrative if you call it that. That poem I wrote that the day I came back from seeing my dad. Got the call at about 3:30 in the morning to say that he'd passed away in the night. Drove to Norwich straight away. And I wrote that night actually, and hardly changed it since. But that's not usually what happens. So it's a bit of a mix, but that unusually for me, those poems were kind of drafted while I was while that time was happening, which is not normally what happens at all. I mean, they were radically rewritten in some cases later. Yeah, thanks for the question though, and
Great.
the first comment. Yeah,
Yeah, great. I think we might be careening out of time, unfortunately.
does that mean we're waiting for Jasmine to return?
She
Thank you,
hasn't
Dave.
Sorry,
returned.
we're at time. I'm sorry. I know there are so many more questions in the chat. So yeah, thank you guys for your engagement's just been so lovely to see coming in and the chat and everything. Well done, both of you. Thank you. It's been a lovely evening, and
Thank
congratulations,
you.
Rory.
Can I just say thank you to everyone who sort of logged on. Obviously, I can't see anyone. It's a bit weird, but it's a bit odd in it. It's just
Yeah.
how it is. But we'll never get used to it, will we? But I'm honoured that you thought it was worth spending time here, and thank you very very much. And thank you also to you, Jasmine, and to Michael and to John and to everyone at Carcanet. Yeah, thank you. Wonderful press, and I'm exceptionally proud to be published by you. So thank you. And to you, Dec, thank you.
Pleasure, mate. Great book.
Cheers.
Yes, please go and buy the book. I have put it in the chat for you, but I can see you've got more messages to send. So it will come as an email tomorrow. There's the discount code in there. Please go and buy a copy. And if you have any troubles with any of that, just send me an email and I'll do my best to help you get hold of one. So the last thing for me to say is please join us next time. Our next launch is on the 8th of May. We're launching a debut collection by Christine Rosita Walker, who's a Jamaican poet. She's going to be talking to Rachel Mann about that, and that is in the chat for you now, as well as a link to sign up to our newsletter so you don't miss any of the next events. So that's everything from us. I'm going to leave the chat open for your final few messages, but thank you very, very much, and well done again, Rory, and good night, everyone.
Thank you. Good night, everyone.